Okay, now this particular video I want to talk about what I'm going to call the gay issue. Okay, and what I'd like to do in this particular video is to deal with some myths that are held in common by both the activists, if you like, those who are saying that the church should change its teaching in these issues, and that same-sex marriage is marriage and perfectly sound and so on. And it's also a series of myths that many evangelicals hold on to as well, evangelical Christians, and some Catholics. So these are some myths which are common to a certain subgroup of Christians and to, if you like, gay activists. And I want to deal with them because I think that bringing forward these myths and showing that they are misunderstandings, that they are myths, will actually help both sides understand the issues a little bit better and understand, even if they don't end up agreeing with it, what the church's teaching is. Okay, so what's the first myth? Well, the first myth is about what is natural, especially in a biblical concept. So within the church, where you've got people saying that we should change the church's teaching on the legitimacy of same-sex activities, you've got a lot of people who are saying, look, the Bible says certain things against unnatural sexual activities. That's true. You can find that in St. Paul's letters. But when he talked about unnatural, he could not have possibly been referring to people who are born with same-sex attraction as one of their predispositions. People who are genetically predisposed to same-sex attraction. Surely, for them, this is natural. And therefore, whatever it says in the Bible against unnatural sexual activities does not apply to these people. It may apply to heterosexuals who engage in these activities, but not homosexuals by nature who engage in these activities. And a lot of more conservative Christians would agree. They would say, yeah, that's right, and that's exactly why it must be impossible. It can't be true that these people are that way based on, at least largely, genetic considerations, genetic factors. And so the common misconception here is, what does natural mean in the Christian conception and in St. Paul's letter to the Romans? What does he mean by natural, and what do we mean in the church by natural in the moral context? Alright, well, before we get to that, let's look at the actual evidence. Is there evidence for a biological component to same-sex attraction? And the answer is yes, there is. Probably a significant genetic component, although it would vary from person to person, like a lot of things in the human condition. Now, the evidence from twins studies and other research would indicate that none of these genetic factors absolutely determines sexuality, but it does strongly predispose people to a particular direction. Alright, so the twin studies don't show 100% correlation, but they do show a high correlation between twins and identical twins in terms of their sexual predisposition, if you like. Now, a lot of evangelical Christians say, no, that can't be right. None of this stuff proves that it's genetics. They haven't found the gay gene, and all that's true. They haven't found a gay gene that makes you gay. It's not that simple anyway, and very few things are when it comes to looking at the human condition. But then the activists say, well, yeah, it is genetic, or largely, and therefore it's natural and good. And to oppose it as unnatural is simply, false to the facts and unjust as a result. But the common myth here is that natural means biological. in the Christian worldview and in the thinking of, say, St. Paul. And unfortunately, that's not the only meaning of natural. It is one meaning. Natural can mean biological. But it doesn't just mean biological. It has a number of other connotations as well. Now, theologically, when we're talking about what is natural to the human being in a Christian sense, we're not just talking about whatever is biologically caused, because there are many genetic predispositions and biological causations that are unhealthy. It's actually quite possible that there is a genetic predisposition to addiction. Very likely there is genetic predisposition to different types of mental illness, including schizophrenia. It's quite possible there are genetic predispositions to things like heart disease and so on, in fact almost certain. So there are plenty of biologically natural predispositions in people that are not necessarily healthy just because they're biologically natural. But when we're talking theologically about what is natural to man, we're actually including the concept of healthy, the concept of wholeness, if you will. So natural in that theological sense, the Christian understanding of anthropology, the study of what man is. Natural means more than just, yes, it's biological. It also means that it's healthily biological, if you like, that it's man functioning healthily and wholly, body and soul. Alright, it includes some connection to biology, but it transcends just biological facts. It also looks at what works, if you like, in the human creature. What comes naturally to it when it's at its healthiest and when it's not sick in some way. And what fulfills the purpose? This is the other very important perspective on what is natural in the Christian sense and in the sense of the New Testament. It's about fulfilling a purpose. So what is natural is also considered what they call teleologically, in terms of purpose and aim and goal, not just in terms of whatever happens to be the case, in terms of scientific observation or biology, but what it is at its best when it's working properly, fulfilling its purpose. Alright, so what is the purpose of the male and female genital organs sexually? What is the reasonably obvious purpose? And for this, again, we certainly can't lose touch with biology. Biology is very important, but it's pretty obvious biologically what they're for. The male and the female reproductive organs are complementary, and they may form a complementary union, penis into vagina, to procreate. That's a fundamental biological purpose. Nobody really denies that. But there's more to it than that. Procreation is a very important, biologically fundamental purpose, but it's not the only purpose. We know that from millennia of experience, that it also unites emotionally two people. So while they're uniting bodily, they're also uniting emotionally. So why does it unite them emotionally at the level of the soul as well as the level of the body? Well, for all sorts of reasons, but there are biological factors here too. During the sexual act, oxytocin is released. The very fact that pleasure is associated with the act and with the two people being together is a form of positive conditioning that nature provides to bind them together. So there's an emotional and a physical union. So what does the uniting of male and female bodies in the sexual act represent? Well, it obviously represents procreation, the creation of new life. That's a fundamental part of its purpose, but also it represents union between two complementary, two different halves of the human species, if you will. And this is obvious and biologically based. and also based on, common sense. And the thing about both these aspects of the purpose of the sexual act, the complementary union and the procreation, is that what they lead to is, or what they facilitate, part of their purpose is to facilitate good parenting, but not just parenting in the vague general sense, but in the sense of a mother and a father who provide complementary parts to the job of parenting. Doesn't mean that people who don't have both parents can't be brought up properly, of course, but ideally, and in terms of intended purpose, if you like, the fundamental purpose of these aspects of human nature is to encourage bi-parenting, you might call it. Mother and father bringing up the children. Okay, so that's the purpose and therefore the foundation of the nature of human sexuality. So when we talk about natural in a biblical and a theological sense, that's what we're talking about. Okay, so what that means is that just because some people have an inbuilt inclination to same-sex attraction or attraction to animals or inanimate objects, as sometimes happens. There are people with quite different sexual attractions that are, don't either fall in the gay side or the heterosexual side, the straight side. They're quite different again. And there are unfortunately people who are attracted to prepubescent children. But that's not what it might well be inherent in them. They may well have something that they certainly haven't chosen. They don't, nobody wakes up in the morning one day and says, I think I'll be attracted to animals today. No, that doesn't happen. People don't just make a decision to be attracted to something. That's not how it happens. We know that. So obviously there is some inherent factor. And yes, environment played a part, but clearly it's not a choice in most cases. But it doesn't make it natural in the Christian sense, even though it's natural in the purely biological sense. Just the way cancer is perfectly natural in the biological sense. It doesn't make it healthy or natural in that sense, the Christian sense. Well, alright, what's another myth? Another myth is that, and related to the first, I suppose, that if people have same-sex attraction, then there's some sense in which it's their fault, or that they couldn't avoid it. Sorry, that they could avoid it. And that is one that's really quite common amongst Christians, some Christians anyway. But unfortunately, it's common because many Christians are ignorant of traditional moral theology. Alright, so you could call this the relationship between nature, nurture and the fall. The truth is, there is no reason to think that the fall, the original sin in mankind, did not affect its genetic integrity. That our sinfulness has no effects on our body or on what we're born with. There's no reason to think that. It's not actually Christian doctrine. Christian doctrine is that the whole of human nature was affected by the fall. The fall, where humanity first sinned and fell into sin and, if you like, left its relationship, its original relationship with God. The fall consists of a withdrawal from supernatural grace. We withdrew from supernatural grace. And therefore, in a sense, we reverted to biological limitation. The Church teaches that if there had been no fall, then we would not have been limited to mere biology. There would have been this supernatural grace, which would have added another whole dimension to our existence. And Christianity is about the recovery of that extra dimension. But there is this sense of reversion to mere biological factors to some extent in the fall. But there's also not just this withdrawal of one thing, but also the addition of another in a sense. It allowed corruption of human nature. Now, almost all our characteristics we have as people derive from what we gain genetically and what we gain from our environment as we grow up. And there's also, of course, the decisions we make along the way, but so much is dependent upon what we're dealt with genetically and environmentally. And that means we're affected by our own internal imperfections and the external imperfections of society. And all of that's involved with original sin. Alright, now, one of the problems that a lot of evangelicals have is that they don't really distinguish between temptations and sins. And they not only say, alright, if you've got this affliction, as they would think of it, then you must have done something, or somebody did something to you to make you like that. You know, it might not have been your fault, it might have been somebody else, but it's not genetic because it can't be, because they have, again, they share this false idea of what natural means in a Christian worldview. But in fact, it's now natural in that sense for us to be flawed. But this other error is the misunderstanding of the distinction between temptations and sins. So many Christians think of same-sex attraction as a sin, so that you can't have a gay Christian, all right? And of course by saying this to people who are Christian and who have same-sex attraction, they cause great distress, and completely unnecessarily. It's based on ignorance. An attraction is a disposition, it's a tendency towards something, but it's not an act, and it's not a choice, by definition. And so it can't be an actual sin. An actual sin can only subsist in an act of the will. And therefore same-sex attraction is not a sin. It can be a temptation, an internal temptation, like any other attraction to things we ought not to be attracted to. Attractions which are very common. Never mind questions of sexual ethics, but, you know, many of us are attracted to things we ought not to be attracted to. But that in itself is not a sin, it's temptation. Alright, so once we get past this misunderstanding of what natural means in the Christian worldview, then I think we can dissolve a lot of the misunderstanding that exists mainly within the church at the moment between those who want to change the teaching and those who are defenders of the traditional teaching but don't really understand it. And one of the biggest problems that this leads to, apart from people telling gay Christians that they can't actually have same-sex attraction, they can't be gay, if they're truly Christian. Sometimes they say, oh yes, well yes, okay, you've got this problem. But then they say, oh, but, you know, because if you're a true Christian, you know, if you're really walking with God, you can be healed of this, you can be converted. Part of your conversion, your repentance, should be to get rid of this same-sex attraction. And again, it's based on bad theology. The truth is that these kinds of disorders, what we used to call besetting sins in a sense, or the temptations to besetting sins, the weaknesses that are inherent to different people, and everybody has their different weaknesses, there is no guarantee. The truth is there is no guarantee that this side of the grave they will be simply abolished. Instead, the church teaches we struggle with weaknesses throughout our lives. Now, they may change over time, and God can miraculously heal people of physical diseases, of mental diseases. God can do anything he likes. But let's be honest about it. Let's be honest and say that for that to happen, for a certain type of attraction to just completely disappear, would normally be the result of a miracle. And we aren't entitled to believe that we must have a miracle, that we're guaranteed one. And nor should we say that to somebody else, that, oh, well, God, God will, without a revelation from God himself. You don't have the right to say to somebody, I know that, if you're truly sincere and you're truly devout, that God will take this away from you. You don't know that. There is no basis for that claim in the theology of the church, in the understanding of either scripture or tradition. So the problem is that people who go around saying, well, people with SSA, as they call it, same-sex attraction, they can be converted or healed or changed, and this idea that you can almost guarantee it if they're pious enough and they try hard enough, is that it's false, and what it does is it leads to torment. Now, some people may well be changed. There may well be psychological things that can be done in certain cases, depending on where their same-sex attraction came from, whether it was largely genetic or whether there was a strong environmental component in their upbringing that led them to that. Obviously not everybody's the same, and so we can't claim that they are. But in most cases, there is no guarantee that anything like that can work or will work or will suddenly take away the temptation. And so when people put forward that as a kind of almost mandated therapy, if you want to be a proper Christian, you've got to get rid of this attraction, they're just torturing people unnecessarily. Here's another problem. And this is a problem that's not just found with evangelicals, but Catholics as well, with the Roman Catholic Church at the moment. Look, it is true. SSA is an objective moral disorder. In other words, although it's a temptation and not a sin, it is a temptation to do something which is not healthy for the body and soul of a human being. The desire for sexual activity with somebody of the same sex is disordered. It means that your attraction is in the wrong direction. However, here's the problem. At the moment, the Roman Catholic Church uses that term, objective moral disorder, pretty much only for same-sex attraction. And that's really not justifiable based on their own theological tradition. Because there are objective disorders aplenty, as I've hinted at before. Not just sexual, but other ones as well. But let's look at the sexual ones. As I said, some people are aroused by inanimate objects, by things, some by animals, some by prepubescent children. There are all sorts of objective moral disorders. But guess what? It's bigger than that. Everybody's sexuality is objectively, morally disordered. Because anybody who is strongly attracted to or aroused by anybody other than their spouse, their attraction is directed towards the wrong object. It's disordered. So anybody, male or female, who's ever been aroused by somebody who is not their husband or wife, they've experienced an objectively, morally disordered attraction. Now, it doesn't mean they did anything with it. They may well, and probably did in most cases, fight that or ignore it. But it doesn't change the fact that it was an objective disorder of attraction. So, all of human sexuality is disordered to some degree and in various ways. Now, we are body and soul. Our physicality and our will cannot be easily separated. They're not independent. We can't treat ourselves as this choosing object, this will attached to a body, or this soul attached to a body. We are body and soul as one. The physical and the emotional, mental and volitional, to do with the will, are inseparable. They are dependent upon one another. And that means that what is biological is not just biological. And that being biologically whole and healthy relates to our whole person health, the health of our body and soul. Now, in terms of the reasons why SSA is objectively morally disordered, we've looked at that a little bit before, because we've already said what the purpose of the human sex organs is, and we can see what it is biologically. You cannot disconnect that from the rest of the person, from them considered emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. It's all one reality. And so there's no point saying, oh, well, you know, that might be the biological function, but, you know, we can choose it to have another function and replace it with something different. You can't really separate what is biologically whole and healthy with what is whole person, whole and healthy like that. And I'm sorry to say, but it is a fact. It's not a politically correct fact to mention, but it is a fact that sodomy is physically very unhealthy, even apart from AIDS. That there are a whole syndrome, there's a whole bunch of disorders, biological disorders I'm talking about now, medical conditions associated with it, very serious and negative. You might say it's nature's hint. But somebody could say, oh, well, there's ways around that, and, you know, you can do it different ways, and blah, blah, blah. Look, take the hint. It's clearly not fulfilling all of these things, not just sodomy, but all of these sexual activities. Yeah, all of them, outside of the marital act, if you like, are not furthering that fundamental function, that fundamental purpose of human sexuality, which is that complementary union of two human beings and procreation. Because what the sexual act is to the body, marriage is to the whole person. It is the union of two complementary persons. It's a complementary union, and it's a complete self-giving, in the same way that the sexual act is the ultimate intimacy physically, and is an enormous act of self-donation, obviously, holding nothing back physically. That's what marriage is at the level of the whole person. You give yourself to the other person, for richer, for poorer, till death do you part. It's this complete self-giving and this complementary union. They go together. What the sexual act is physically, marriage is at the level of the whole person. And you cannot ignore the biological facts when looking at the purpose and therefore what is natural in sexuality, and therefore what is moral. Morality is about health, but not just health of the body. But it would be foolish to try to understand our moral health in complete isolation from the proper functioning of the human body when it is functioning properly and healthily. And that's about all I have to say about this matter at the present.